So welcome and thank you for joining us today as we share the barriers that exist in the organic salad greens supply chain in Canada and explore strategies to overcome these barriers. My name is Marla Carlson. I'm chair of the Organic Value Chain Advisory Committee, and I am moderator for today's webinar. The Canadian Organic Growers Office is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We would like to recognize the many important contributions Indigenous peoples have made and continue to make. We also want to acknowledge the injustices, both past and present. And as a minimal step towards reconciliation, we encourage settlers to learn the history of the land and the First Nations that inhabited it, and which First Nations currently reside nearby your place of residence. To learn more about the history of your area, please visit www.whosland. We're going to do a little housekeeping before we get going, just so that we can all get the most out of the webinar. So we are pleased to offer simultaneous interpretation in French today. To access the French channel, please select the icon labeled interpretation at the bottom of the Zoom window and choose the French channel. If you have any questions during the presentation, and we hope you do, please enter them into the Q&A box located in the bottom or the side of your screen, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the presentation. We also encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat so you can connect with other participants and share your observations. We are also sending out a poll to learn about your relation to the organic blueberry sector. And so are we going to do that poll now? No, we're not. Oh, yes, we are. Sorry. Yeah, let's do the poll. Excellent. So if you could just take a moment to answer the poll, because it's always nice to see who's in the virtual room. And we've had a really great response to this webinar. So we're excited that you're all here with us today. Maybe we'll give it a minute or a few seconds. I say a minute or two, but that's a long time in Zoom world. I'll just wait a few more seconds and then show the results so we can all see who's here. And there you go. So that's excellent. We have a number of producers on the call. Yeah, and again, it looks like we have a few areas not here today, but obviously these will be recorded so folks can listen in later. But we do have a nice distribution across the value chain, so we really appreciate you being here today. So today we'll examine and discuss the challenges and opportunities within the Canadian organic salad green supply chain. These findings are from the Canadian Access Project, a 2-year initiative by Canadian organic growers and managed by David Mazer-Goulet as project lead. You can connect with David in the chat. The project engaged stakeholders across the country to determine what barriers stand in the way of increasing production and sales of 6 organic crops. COG and their partners specifically examined organic carrots, beef, blueberries, salad greens, oats, and field pea supply chains in Canada. The Canada Access Project is funded in part by the Government of Canada through the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Canadian Agricultural Strategic Priorities Program, a $50.3 million 5-year investment to help agriculture adapt and remain competitive. So joining us today, we have one of the project contributors, Dawn Murray, Senior Consultant with Harry Cummings and Associates. Dawn will present the findings of the research and propose strategies to overcome barriers and the work that he's been working on behalf of the Canadian organic growers on the project. So over to you, Dawn.
Great. Thank you, Marla, and welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us today. And as Marla mentioned, this is being recorded. So for those who have to leave early or not able to join, the recorded session will be available at a future date at the COG website. A bit background and context first around, when we're looking at salad greens, what we're referring to as part of the research that we did and looking at the supply chain barriers. In our early discussions with the value chain committee, and we were sort of beating around ideas around, okay, what are we going to look at here when we look at these six, again, in terms of scoping and ensuring that the project was manageable. And specifically, when we sort of landed on salad greens, we thought, well, are we going to focus on a specific variety or type of lettuce or leafy green? And we ultimately decided to purposely leave this open as a sort of a catch-all category and look at salad greens broadly rather than focusing on a specific variety, in a way that enhanced our ability to reach out to a broader group of stakeholders that are involved in producing lettuces and leafy greens and so on, as opposed to sort of just focusing on something like spinach or kale, where again, we would have had to go out there and sort of really beat the bushes a bit further to maybe to find someone who is really specializing in one type of one variety of lettuce or leafy green. And as was the case in any event, as we sort of went through and did this research and we were sort of doing the interviews with producers, it's not uncommon that producers were or are in fact producing a variety of different lettuces and or leafy greens. So it was sort of consistent with their production models anyways. We look at more than one variety. Salad greens in general are sort of attractive producers because they can produce an early crop and sort of generate some early income in the season for their income stream. And typically there's also, with the varieties that are being produced, multiple crops that are grown over the course of a season. So there are some of the attractive features for growing lettuces and leafy greens. I've just indicated in this slide, sort of a short typology of what we're referring to, or sort of what is sort of we're thinking of or reflecting on in terms of the types of lettuces and salad greens that are sort of will be looked at or thought of or provide the foundation for what was included in this study. So it is quite broad. Now there are two production systems or approaches for growing salad greens, and our focus for this study was field grown lettuces and leafy greens. Now, sometimes we know that greenhouse operations are used in combination with field production. Particularly were the case, for example, where greenhouses are used for growing starter plants that are then transported or transplanted to the field. Transplanting has the advantage of providing an earlier crop rather than direct seeding, and may also allow for more accurate planting space and final plant population. The other advantage with transplanting might be that plants are less exposed to early insect damage, drought, or other early season stresses from weeds. But as I said, we didn't really focus on greenhouse production, so we didn't sort of look at anything related to hydroponics, and we didn't sort of look at anything related to vertical farming. Not that there isn't maybe a need to do that at a future date, but again, for the purpose of scoping this work, we didn't go into that area of production when it comes to organic lettuces and leafy greens. Right, so to quickly go over the research methods that we used in our outreach and collecting data. We identified a number of key informants across Canada with the support of the Organic Value Chain Advisory Committee, and then conducted semi-structured interviews with those stakeholders, representing different aspects of the supply chain, so producers, marketing, distributors, and so on. And through that process, we identified challenges in those different elements of the supply chain. Altogether, we reached out to a total of 17 stakeholders that were initially invited to participate, and 12 of those stakeholders ultimately agreed to join us in an interview. 11 of those 12 are producers, and one was a retailer. Although, of course, many of the producers that we spoke to are also involved in direct sales activity. As I mentioned earlier, it's common for producers to be engaged in producing a variety of lettuces and leafy greens. So they're typically not specializing in just spinach or just kale or just arugula. It's typically a combination of lettuces and leafy greens they're growing. And quite common that they're also growing other vegetables, so be it carrots or onions or garlic or some other variety of vegetables are being grown in combination with their lettuces and leafy greens. And typically, this sort of mixed market garden approach is linked to deriving benefits of growing complementary varieties of field crops, where it might be provided an advantage for pest control or soil health or other benefits. And also, the benefit of it providing greater income security in that there are multiple crops being grown in a year, and there's a potential that provides some insurance in the event that some crops perform poorly, or if there's a crop failure with a particular variety in that growing year. The 11 producers that we spoke to reflect a mix of small, mid-sized, and larger scale operations, ranging from operations that are just an acre or a little more, operations that are up to 5 acres in size, some that are between 10 and 20 acres, and at least one producer we spoke to who is a larger scale operation with 200 plus acres. The producers that we spoke with represent 6 provinces across Canada, so BC, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. And the most common varieties grown as specifically identified by these producers included, again, a broad variety of leafy lettuces, arugula, spinach, kale, char, but also some head lettuce, including butterhead, romaine, as part of their production activities. The production the production season typically runs from June to September or even into October. And some producers are able to start production in late May if the weather is cooperating and if it's warm enough. Now, a few other sort of data collection pieces that we looked at in addition to the interviews. We heard from relevant stakeholders that participated in the Eastern Ontario supply chain meetings and stakeholder panels that were conducted earlier last year. And there were at least 2 organic salad green producers that participated in the organic vegetable supply chain panel, along with several other relevant stakeholders that were involved in retail-related activities. There was sort of, because there was salad green participation in there and other elements of the supply chain, there was, thematically similar sort of types of issues and challenges were addressed as part of those discussions. There was also a national survey of organic sector stakeholders that was conducted in March of 2021 through a tri-organization collaboration between COG, the Canadian Organic Trade Association, and the Organic Federation of Canada. Again, looking at data gaps in the sector. And about over 370 stakeholders responded to that survey, including at least 300 producers that were involved in various crop production activities, grains, vegetables, fruit, and so on. Now, although that survey did not specifically focus on organic salad greens, many of the findings ultimately serve to reinforce and validate the themes that emerged through the key informant interviews that we conducted with our salad green producers. Another sort of relevant aspect of our data collection was our participation at the Guelph Organic Conference roundtable discussion. Again, this was last year, 2021, where we had this event with a focus on looking at supply chain barriers. And several panelists shared their observations on barriers that they've experienced directly or have knowledge of. And there were also about 50 attendees, virtual attendees, that were polled on a series of questions related to supply chain barriers in the organic sector. So again, information that we collected that served to reinforce and validate some of the themes that were coming out of our key informant interviews. And then the final element of our research was just the document and literature review that we did, looking at, again, relevant information that was out there that we could pull in and, again, provide complementary narrative on the challenges and barriers across the supply chain. So before we get into the findings, I want to take a couple of minutes and talk about the sector itself and the activity in the sector based on the data that's available. to tell us about, again, a snapshot of what's happening with organic salad greens production in Canada. And before I talk about the bullet points that are on this particular slide, I just want to maybe provide the group here with a bigger picture of the organic and non-organic production activity across Canada. The production data for salad greens tends to be aggregated with a number of varieties that are typically tabulated together. And so when we look at Stats Canada data, for example, we know that the total area of field-grown organic and non-organic head lettuce, fresh head lettuce, leaf lettuce, and mixed lettuce amounted to about 9,643 acres of production in 2019. And that production had a farm gate value of about 82.2 million. In addition, standalone data is collected at least on spinach as a field-grown crop. And again, the organic and non-organic amount of spinach being grown in 2019 amounted to about 1,700 acres. And that had a total farm gate value of about 10.4 million almost. Quebec, based on Stats Canada data, harvests of the majority of the lettuce and just under 50% of the spinach that's grown in Canada. Again, that's organic and non-organic combined. And then that the other leading provinces then are Ontario and British Columbia, following Quebec. Although we didn't look at greenhouse production specifically, as I mentioned, I thought I would just throw in some greenhouse production numbers here at a national level. And in that area, the organic and non-organic fresh head lettuce, leaf lettuce, and mixed lettuce, the area under production in greenhouse area in 2019 was 3.4 million square feet, which had a total farm gate value of almost $35.4 million. And then the other sort of key aspect of greenhouse production relevant to sort of leafy greens and microgreens is this area of the microgreens and shoots. So plants that are about 2 weeks old. And the total area of organic and non-organic production of those microgreens and shoots amounted to about 640,000 square feet in 2019, with a total farm gate value of almost 5.7 million. So again, some pretty substantial numbers when we're looking at the national domestic numbers on combined production of organic and non-organic at the farm gate level. So when we drill down then and try and have a look at the organic component here, we're really relying on data that's provided by the organic certifying bodies and reviewed and compiled by CODA to help put this profile together. And from that, we've determined that there are at least 140 producers growing organic salad greens in Canada in 2020 on a total area of at least 3,332 acres, right? Now, it's important to remember that, or keep in mind that because the various certifying bodies collect and report data using different categories, these figures reflect really a broad combination of crops that fall under general headings such as salad greens, microgreens, salad mixes, Mexican mix, spicy mix, Asian mix. And then in some cases, data is also provided that speaks specifically to a variety like arugula, Swiss chard, kale, spinach, leafy greens, and lettuce. So that number is very much a combination of a wide gamut of lettuces and leafy greens and mixes and specifics. We also know from the data that was provided by the certifying bodies that organic salad green producers are located in every province, and there's even a small amount of production that was reported in at least one territory. Based on this data, again, that was provided by the certifying bodies, it appears that the largest area of organic salad greens production occurs in Saskatchewan, with about 39% of that total 3,200 acres in production, followed by Quebec, BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Manitoba. And then the Atlantic provinces, as I said, each of the Atlantic provinces also have some amount of organic production as well. I'll have additional details in the final report on all the specifics for these numbers. I don't want to get bogged down into it, but just to give the group a sense that is production of organic greens is national in scope, broadly based, with some concentration in a few provinces. And I also suspect that these figures likely represent something of a minimum estimate, as not all certifying bodies collect and report data in the same manner. So we're taking this very much as a sort of an estimate and not certainly an exact number. Now, we tried to put an estimate on the total farm sales for organic salad greens, which is difficult given the variety of crops that fall under the banner and the variability in the amount of volume and production associated with the production area. But we do know, in speaking with some producers, that they've confirmed that it's possible to generate, upwards of 50,000 or more per acre from organic salad greens. So we use that as a base number in terms of, okay, that's, that is possible, that's the potential. But if we conservatively estimate that producers are generating, let's say, $38,000 per acre, that's about 75% of that 50,000 per acre value that was shared with us. And then if we apply that across the 3,200 acres that were reported in production, we would project then that total farm gate value for organic salad green would be about, or as high as, 122.8 million. We know from other data that's out there that there are potential opportunities for import substitution. The total value of imported organic salad greens was substantial in 2019, coming in at about 101.5 million, which included fresh chilled lettuce, salad cuts, and cut mixes and spinach. And again, I kind of suspect that 101.5 million is a conservative figure, as I'm not entirely certain that every type of salad green is accounted for in that data. It's just difficult to say when you've got large tabulations of general sort of headings that are lumped together. We don't have current retail sales data. We might have a look at that to see if we can capture that, but we do know from 2012, yes, this is 10 years ago, but at least from 2012, retail sales of organic head lettuce, leaf lettuce, and lettuce salad mixes in Canada amounted to 78 million. And we also know that number is only is a partial reflection of what the total retail sales is because not all stores are sort of contributing to that retail sales data. So that data is 10 years out of date. It doesn't include all stores, and I suspect that is a much larger number today. And we'll see, maybe potentially sort of seeing if we can't find a more up-to-date number to include in our final report on that. But at least I wanted to give the group a sense of the size of the dollar values that we're looking at here when we're looking at organic salad greens and leafy lettuces. Right. So I want to spend the balance of this this webinar going through the barriers and challenges that we came across, and concurrently looking at the strategies that we are proposing alongside of these barriers. So one of the messages that sort of consistently came up, was this ongoing issue of the challenge, the cost associated with transitioning to organic, right? Concerns around the amount of time and resource commitment that it takes to acquire and adopt new knowledge and practices related to organic production, new knowledge and practices related to the marketing of organic products, and finding and securing marketing channels. Also concerns and issues around the time that's needed to dedicate to record keeping for establishing and maintaining certification. And also the issue of the likelihood of a producer experiencing some amount of reduced cash flow during that transition period, as there could be initially lower yields before a premium price can be captured on that certified organic label. Now, some of the producers that we spoke to as part of the salad greens piece observed or commented on that they have mixed views on the value of being certified organic at times. And even some producers are aware of some other organic producers that have decided to drop their certification, or producers that have transitioned to organic and are following organic practices and protocols, but have not pursued certification. And this is for a variety of reasons. In some cases, as I mentioned, it's the cost of certification is viewed as being too high of an expense, and the producer would prefer to direct their money to other production costs or upgrades on the farm. Producers specifically mentioned that maintaining records was viewed as being too time consuming, especially when producing a large variety of salad crops or leafy lettuces and other vegetable products. And there was a preference to invest time in focusing on production activities and not sort of dedicating time to the record keeping or the maintenance of that certification record that's needed. Now, Interestingly, a number of producers did confirm that they do see the value in record keeping, as it can assist with production management and even benefit succession planning if that production formula is maintained, is documented, and it sort of can be a handover document to an incoming management group. So that group doesn't have to sort of reinvent the wheel. But still, even so, a number of people viewed the record keeping as quite time intensive. One producer also mentioned that it's probably it's in the interest of the organic sector to ensure that it's part of the conversation on other farming approaches or systems such as regenerative farming, and ensuring that the organic sector contributes to that conversation on regenerative farming and how it aligns with and supports the organic. Another record-keeping issue raised by one particular producer was the protocols associated with the Canada GAP, the food safety certification, and a concern that the needs for maintaining those standards and protocols are generally more suited or appropriate for larger scale operations, and it would be ideal if something could be developed or adapted that would be better suited for smaller scale operations, because there was a feeling that some of the requirements weren't really applicable or suitable for smaller scale operations. The other big issue that came up in terms of challenges around transitioning is access to information, right? One producer emphasized that it's important for producers to understand the financial management of a farm and to be open and to be receptive about seeking and accepting outside expertise at times, versus holding firm to a go-it-alone mindset. So this producer sort of emphasized that consultants can provide a valuable service, be it in finance, production, or marketing activities or expertise, and that they should be sought out to help take some of the guesswork out of business farm planning. However, of course, the caveat here that also was put forward that producers noted that this information is not widely available, and that the organic sector is rather underserviced in those sort of expertise elements that are out there, if they're available. And there's typically a focus on the larger scale conventional non-organic farming in terms of what institutions and government support is going to provide in areas of education research. Several producers did confirm that they have found their local organic community and or provincial regional organizations to be quite helpful and willing to share information and best practices. But then they also noted that when the information they're in need of isn't available through those sources, what is available from other sources, academic and research institutions and governments, for example, it's typically not specific to organic and or relevant to their region, or it's too technical, or it's too costly. So there continues to be issues with the access to information that is relevant, timely, and affordable. Several producers commented on the historical importance of rural extension services that worked alongside academic institutions in facilitating knowledge transfer and making academic research accessible. And it was suggested that a similar knowledge transfer service needs to be reintroduced or possibly taken on by a provincial producer association with government support. There was a real concern that ultimately extension really shouldn't be left entirely to the private sector, as again, this could really just maybe create another barrier to accessing information. This issue around the cost of transitioning and access to information was also raised as sort of a significant barrier in the national survey that was conducted last year. So again, thematically, it was coming up in other areas outside of the interviews that we were doing with the stakeholder group. In terms of a strategy going forward, we want to emphasize the importance of developing and strengthening the knowledge transfer points and ensuring that access is convenient and affordable. The information on transitioning to organic and ongoing advancements in production, processing, and marketing should be organized and consolidated for easy and efficient access. There's a need for collaboration from producer stakeholder agencies, certifying bodies, research institutions, and government to reinvest in extension services for the organic sector that are timely, relevant to local conditions, and easy to access. And we also feel there's a need to work with research institutions to address the challenges that intellectual property agreements pose, right? So ensuring that information can be purchased and accessed and that it is not monopolized in any area. And really sort of something that is certainly within the control of the organic sector is working to ensure that the certification process is easy to navigate, efficient, and consistent, right? We're looking at areas to reduce paperwork where it's possible, and even potentially, I think some certifying bodies are moving in this direction, but in continuing to sort of look at using online platforms that allow documents to be updated annually with pre-populated data that's carried forward from the previous year, so that the producer isn't having to go through and populate every data field if there hasn't been a major change in their production activities. Another really challenge we came across was this limited interest among smaller scale producers to expand beyond their existing scale of production. And this was a finding that was consistent across, I would say, most of the 6 supply chains that we've been looking at. Most of the producers that we spoke to indicated that they are not very interested in expanding beyond their current scale of operation. They're satisfied that the current scale provides sufficient returns and that the workload that they're currently carrying is manageable. One producer sort of noted that they're happy with the direct marketing approach, that they have a known and familiar customer group that is understanding of their operation. When they encounter weather-related challenges or issues, that impact their supply, that customer base is generally sympathetic of the issues, right? So they're not really interested in, this individual is not really interested in moving to a wholesale operation, as it would require a greater commitment to producing a reliable volume, and typically having to overproduce to ensure the volume is met. There's also concerns that when moving to wholesale activities, that it would require another level of management to oversee greater production volumes. One producer noted that they could potentially expand their growing season by perhaps as much as 2 weeks on either end of their growing season with the use of hoop houses. But at this time, they're not really interested in making that type of an investment for the return it would provide. And interestingly, they also expressed a concern about, it wouldn't be at peak production sort of at either end of that sort of seasonal sort of adjustment. And so then they would have to make a decision about when supplying their customers, would there be some that would benefit from this and others that would miss out because they could not accommodate all of their customers with the volume that was produced at those 2 ends of the season. A number of producers just simply mentioned that they straight up want the downtime, right? This is the time that they look forward to when they're not actively producing and they have a time to step away from the heavy production schedule and activities outside the growing season. And they're not interested even in sort of looking at growing a winter greenhouse crop, again, which would require additional infrastructure investment and a specialized production approach and related skills, right? And there was also concerns about moving into greenhouse with the concerns about being able to access a reliable, affordable energy source. Now, beyond the production side of things, one producer also noted that it's impractical for them to consider any additional value-added opportunities, as it would cost them upwards of about $100,000, they indicated, or more to set up a commercial kitchen if they wanted to move into doing some value-added activities with their vegetable products. And then there was also the issue of finding that sort of the qualified labor to run that operation. We had a little bit of discussion with the producers about succession planning and the mindset of the children, the next generation that might sort of be coming in to take on farming. And again, heard from producers that, some children just are not interested in farming. And given land prices, it will be challenging for a new farmer to come in and buy the farm. So a producer mentioned that they'll have to look at creative ways to help new farmers enter and take control of the operation, such as share farming. But even in that case, it'll be crucial to find the right person and the family or family to match their particular organic philosophy. We did talk with one large-scale producer who noted that they've expanded their production capacity by establishing operations in both Eastern and Western Canada. And they dealt with the seasonality issue by establishing an operation in Florida. The producer also went on to note that, made the observation that the food safety regulatory process in Canada for getting products registered can be very time consuming. And this could potentially dissuade some agri-food companies from setting up operations in Canada and focus their investments on in the US or Mexico. So in terms of strategy for this this piece about on the limited interest of getting into or continuing on with the next generation of farming, we do feel that it is though important to support farm succession planning to ensure that organic farms are sustained for next generation producers. In some cases, producers have not given a lot of thought to succession planning at this stage, but this will be important for the organic sector going forward to ensure that momentum is not lost and that land converted to organic does not slip back into conventional production activities or become idle. I think it's also worth looking at some broader demographics, newcomers to Canada, Indigenous populations, to look at opportunities for attracting those groups into organic farming. You know, these strategies aren't the only solution, but are part of the solution and are part of the issue, because of course we're going to talk in a minute about land property prices and other issues as well that also need to be addressed to make it more inviting and make it more realistic for people to enter organic farming. Access to capital came up as an issue that is limiting some production activities or abilities or interest in expanding. Generally, organic farming is not viewed as the best or safest investment by financial institutions compared to conventional farming. Lending institutions tend to link farm viability to farm size, the area of production or the land base, which really does not reflect the proven ability of small acreage farms to be viable and generate significant revenue, right? Also, the ag-related banking incentives tend to focus on very large loans, 500,000 or more. And producers generally feel that more lending options are needed for small investments to support small scale operations. A feeling that in overall small scale farming in general is not well supported relative to the way that large scale conventional farming is, with support and investment being provided by corporate industry, be it chemical industry, fertilizer, seed companies, and research, market, and development. So a very sort of different playing field, conventional versus organic, in terms of the investment and the private sector stakeholders that are working alongside the conventional agriculture sector. From a strategy standpoint, we think it's important to encourage financial institutions to recognize the societal and environmental value of organic farming and provide more favorable credit terms to producers who follow organic standards, right? Ideally, we think that financial institutions should provide more favorable credit terms to producers who reduce their environmental impact in not using pesticides or reducing the CO2 emissions. Also, would emphasize that government provide incentives to banks based on the environmental benefit savings realized through their portfolios. And alongside this, we would also encourage industry stakeholders to provide producers with tools to help them balance their financial, production, and environmental performance. The issue of access to affordability, access to and affordability of organic farm inputs came up in our discussions. And as it relates to salad greens, this specifically related to organic seed and specialized equipment. Now, while some producers have not encountered serious issues accessing organic seed, others have had ongoing issues. The organic seed is not always available. or only in limited quantity, or sometimes there is a strong reliance. And so sometimes there was a strong reliance on untreated, conventional seed. And some producers have expressed concerns about this practice and the issue it creates for protecting organic integrity. And it was also noted that this is really a food security issue, that we have such a strong reliance on offshore seed. We don't have that sort of domestic capacity to look after our own. One producer did stress the importance of having good relations with seed suppliers so that those suppliers know what your needs are in advance. But concerns were expressed broadly about the limited number of seed producers and patented varieties, which is sort of putting producers at risk in having to rely on only one or two sources. And the limited competition means that producers have limited options when it comes to price and quality standards. One producer stressed the importance of having a variety of seed selection to keep ahead of disease and insect adaptation. And again, emphasized that domestic research and production of organic seeds needs to be further developed. Stressing the importance of having plant trials and seed production in Canada, in the Canadian context, so that seeds and plants are conditioned for the local growing environment. Otherwise, you have a situation where Canadian producers may be somewhat compromised by just using offshore seed and then having to go through a trial and error process of finding what works. Now, several of the producers that we spoke to acknowledged that it is a big investment to try and develop a breeding program. But one producer did provide an example of it being done with iceberg lettuce in Quebec, where federal government supported funding for field trials. And then a producer group took it on and they continue to develop the seed. And it's an ongoing sort of endeavor. But the key was to establish a foundation for research and progressively expand varieties in the trials. Other input sort of issues, challenges that were commented on. There was issues of producers finding it difficult to access supplies in local farm supply stores that are not carrying organic inputs or going out of business. And so producers have to be resourceful in finding those inputs. In the case of specialized equipment, sometimes it's just not produced in Canada. Specialized harvesting equipment for greens is typically not produced in Canada, and a producer talked about having to source and research, find a suitable product, piece of equipment from the US or Europe. And another producer talked about watching leafy greens, which can be very time consuming, labor consuming for small scale operations. But unfortunately, they found that when they were looking at commercial machines that are available for this, they're typically built for larger scale operations. So again, the desire to have something that was more purpose built for smaller scale acreage operations and not the heavier equipment that's out there. Again, when we look at the national survey data that was conducted last year, this issue of challenges associated with accessing organic inputs was raised as a significant barrier. In terms of strategies, we would encourage and support collaboration between the organic industry, research institutions, and governments to develop and sustain a domestic organic vegetable seed research and breeding program. Again, I want to emphasize the need for collaboration between organic industry, research institutions, and the government to develop and sustain, right? So it's not just sort of getting it going, it's ensuring that this thing is sort of a legacy investment going forward to ensure that varieties are produced that are optimal for local growing conditions, are resilient to disturbances like climate change, and that the organic seed is accessible to producers. I think there's also a role here for bodies to encourage and support farm supply stores and those agents in identifying and sourcing the organic input and equipment needs for their farming community region with sensitivity in particular to small scale farming. Several of the salad green producers we spoke to talked about their concerns with crop insurance, and in particular that The programs are not effective for small scale, small acreage organic production. Producers commented that these programs are not well designed for the small scale, and also for the diversity of crops that are typically grown on in vegetable production. And typically, when there is organic sort of crop insurance available, it tends to focus on major organic field crops like wheat, oats, barley, and peas. And some instances where organic vegetables are eligible, the coverage might be available for a limited range of vegetables like fresh carrots or fresh cabbage. Another issue with the crop insurance for organic products is that the organic premiums are typically higher than conventional crop premiums, which is what is linked to what would be considered to be a higher risk associated with organic production. But really, this really serves as a disincentive if you're going to put that premium price on there for organic. And again, just another sort of challenge or barrier that a producer has to overcome in terms of trying to create a level playing field with conventional production. Now, one producer did note that they have used conventional crop insurance, but even in that case, the loss threshold was so high that it needed to be an almost catastrophic failure to see any benefits. And ultimately, the benefits really don't effectively cover costs. So basically, in terms of a strategy here, really just looking at encouraging the federal and provincial government bodies to enhance insurance policies to better reflect the needs of small, diversified organic farms. And as some additional context, I've been sort of had a look at some of what they're doing in the U.S. on this, and there'll be a bit more detail on this in the report about what they're doing in the U.S. to look at a broader classification of vegetables to be included under a single insurance policy. The issue of being able to access sufficient, reliable, and affordable labor, again, was something that came up across all 6 supply chains that we've looked at. Producers noted that it is difficult to find sufficient and reliable workers from the Canadian workforce pool. Generally, there are issues of people just being disinterested in farm work, disinterested in seasonal work, disinterested in traveling or relocating to a farm location. And producers also talked about, when relying on a domestic workforce and hiring in a new group of workers each year, is that it is, again, timely and costly to have to retrain and closely supervise those new workers that are coming in each year. And so there is a high degree of satisfaction and with the use of a temporary foreign worker program and working with migrant laborers. And the value of that TF temporary foreign worker program really sort of came across and was magnified as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? When there were disruptions to the food supply chain, and some of those temporary foreign workers had issues with getting into Canada with the travel restrictions. And in the case of the salad production sector, we find that the labor is crucial at several points of production and marketing. And while some of the producers that we spoke to have mechanized certain elements of their production activity, most of the producers are relying on hired help to a great extent. And that relates to areas of seed bed preparation, weed and pest management, the harvesting of lettuces and baby greens, and even washing and packaging. So there's a wide range of areas where hired help is needed to assist in production activities. One producer shared their story of their attempts to hire local workers, but they found that they had to be very selective in their hiring process to get people who are reliable. So they provided the example of, you might find 10 people that respond to a help wanted ad. Interviews are scheduled, but maybe only 5 or 6 actually show up for the interview, and then ultimately finding that maybe only 2 or 3 of those might be considered qualified to hire. And again, it just ultimately sort of convinced that individual that it was the better way to go was to sort of work with the migrant laborers. And they've been very pleased with how that has worked out in terms of their reliability and how effective they've been on site. Again, several of the producers commented on their satisfaction with migrant laborers, and in particular, noting that 2020 was a challenging year when some of their workforce was unable to make it up from Mexico, and it, again, reinforces the difficulties of having to rely to some extent on Canadian workers in hiring, training, and supervising those individuals. And the productivity of that group just not being as high as the migrant labor force. Now, one producer did note that they did have success hiring a group of local older generation workers, but suggested that they already know at this point that the children of this older generation they're not interested in sort of staying on and working in manual labor. And one way that producer sort of ensured that they've been able to maintain that group in terms of making the workplace interesting and not monotonous is by growing a variety of vegetables on their farm, right? And ensuring that the work conditions are good and that the pay is good. And this producer went on to further note that it's important really that as from an employer standpoint that, and for the organic sector as a whole, that really it's important to sort of think about social accountability as part of the organic brand in the future, right? So looking at this holistic care of the environment and social responsibility for workers as part of the organic brand going forward. As I touched on, some producers have automated some of their activities with mixed success. One producer noted that they attempted to automate their harvesting, but ultimately they preferred to stay with a broad mix of greens, and the equipment really wasn't well suited for the mix that they wanted to stay with. Another producer noted that they recently moved from a heavy reliance on hand tools to more automated equipment, but this did require a major cash investment and another level of workforce management in terms of ensuring that those workers were properly trained in the safe operation of that equipment, and that they understood the basic maintenance requirements of the equipment, and that even that they had a sense of confidence and were capable in using that equipment. One producer emphasized the importance of being able to provide workers on site with accommodation, as this enables the workers to be more efficient in starting and finishing the workday. And it's also important because there are typically limited availability of rental units in towns and communities. And so the key message coming away from this was the importance of municipalities being supportive of and allowing farm housing for workers. This producer noted that getting approval for a group of 20 workers is challenging and complicated, as some governments do not want to set a precedent. Local governments do not want to set a precedent for other industries such as tourism. This issue of labor, accessibility, reliability, affordability came up in the national survey as well, and also with the Guelph Roundtable. So again, a consistent theme in other areas that we looked at. In terms of strategies, we really want to sort of emphasize the importance of ensuring that the temporary foreign worker program is maintained and that the application and administrative process is efficient and timely. It's really important that we learn from the labor and cross-border travel disruptions that resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic and ensure that we have a robust system in place that is sufficiently prepared for similar types of disturbances in the future to protect the integrity of the food supply chain. And we also think there's a role here for educating and informing municipal and provincial government officials about the importance of supporting on-site infrastructure development for things like on-site housing for farm workers. The issue of land affordability and availability came up in many of our discussions with producers. Now, there were a small number of producers that suggested in their area land prices and or availability was not a major issue, but most producers emphasized that the cost of entry into farming or expanding their existing land base is prohibitive due to high land valuation and or limited availability of suitable land. And even renting or leasing land is not always a practical option, given that rental land prices have also gone up considerably and that they're in high competition from other farmers. There are also other issues with renting land around the availability of suitable infrastructure on those properties. So there may be a lack of utilities or appropriate buildings, or lack of fencing, lack of water resources, etc. And also just simply there might be something that is a very incompatible land activity taking place on a neighboring land, the surrounding land. One producer spoke about the challenges with managing the debt they took on because of land prices they encountered when they bought the property. And several producers suggested that existing land prices would make it impossible for them to buy their farm today if they were just starting out. Several producers expressed concern about the pace of land valuation and also the issue of farmland being bought up by non-farming interests, land speculators, estate development properties being developed in their area. This issue came up as a significant barrier under the national survey and was also touched on with the Guelph Roundtable. So again, consistently being brought up in other areas that it is a challenge to be addressed. In terms of a strategy, we're really sort of thinking from this standpoint, just looking at developing and supporting land matching programs to help organic producers find land to purchase and ensure that this service is offered in conjunction with other relevant business support services. So potential approaches to developing, supporting, and promoting sort of this land matching, looking at farm linking, where you might be pairing new organic farmers with retiring organic farmers, enabling that next generation to come in where there is no sort of no family to sort of take on the farm. And then the retiring farm can serve as a mentor for those young farmers coming in. Looking at cooperative farming activities where a pool of young farmers would come together and gain enough capital to buy or lease a farm they can share. And that particularly works well with a business where there might be sort of complementary businesses that the contributing partners want to bring to the farm activity. And also farmland trusts, where a community or a conservancy group raises funds to purchase environmentally important farms and then rent that land to young farmers who can then at least sort of gain sort of an entry point and experience. And then hopefully that would be the jump off point for going forward. There's also, of course, an important role for government here. There's a general feeling that the government needs to be a stronger partner in advancing production and value-added opportunities through supportive policies and regulations. And part of this is looking at making more allowances for on-farm infrastructure developments, roadside advertising, and complementary funding programs to strengthen and support on-farm infrastructure development. And also an interest and a desire that government-backed funded programs make more allowances for new farmers, first-year farmers, to help them access grant money in their first year of business, to help them cover startup costs. The issue of climate change related challenges came up. Producers commented on an increasing frequency of extreme weather events associated with climate change, how it's impacting production activities and cycles, and the producers are having to adapt more quickly to changing conditions. There's also an observation that farm practices associated with organic and regenerative farming support greater resilience in the context of climate variabilities, and research and practices will need to adapt going forward. So for example, developing more drought-tolerant crop varieties, more appropriate water management strategies, more appropriate soil conservation and nutrient recharge strategies, and so on. Consumers that we spoke with confirmed that heat and drought are major risks to salad green crops, and that they have used or are using a variety of approaches to try and mitigate some of that damage, for example, irrigation and shade cloth. However, several producers commented on challenges that they experienced this past year, in particular with the extreme heat. And one producer noted that in their case, the early season of extreme heat in BC killed off seeds before they germinated and ultimately resulted in the loss of 6 weeks worth of sales. The producer noted that there are strategies and options for trying to save salad crops in adverse weather, like I mentioned, irrigation and shade cloth. But ultimately, if you don't get that seed to germinate, it is really sort of it's a complete loss, right? And so there is a concern about these episodes of extreme heat becoming more common, and possibly maybe even having to consider pivoting to other crops if there's a need to sort of look at other bankable crops that can weather that activity. Given the importance of irrigation in vegetable production, one producer also commented on the need to ensure that all property owners along a shared stream or waterway are mindful of not wasting water, so to hope to maximize that availability of water. And also ensuring that they're not contaminating the water to ensure that its quality is preserved. It was also emphasized that municipalities need to enforce their water protection and conservation policies to protect and support farms located on the urban fringe. In terms of strategies, we're suggesting looking at the ongoing support of institutional research on climate resilience agriculture and ensuring that that research is relevant and accessible to producers. Producers need to have access to and be informed about climate adaptation best practices. And it's important to build the knowledge base and confidence of producers to understand climate change events and appropriate practices. There's also a role to support enhanced collaboration between all relevant stakeholders to advance organic farming systems. So farm practices associated with organic and regenerative farming support greater resilience in the context of climate variabilities. And again, so we feel that the research and practices will need to look at adapting going forward. And as I mentioned, these issues, looking at drought tolerant crops, water management strategies, soil conservation, nutrient recharge strategies, and so on. I just have a couple slides left, and then we'll be wrapping up. So I apologize. I know we are on the top of the hour, but we're almost through this. So thanks for hanging in there. Some producers commented on the need to find eco-friendly alternatives to plastic packaging, plastic mulch films, and so on, right? Several producers commented on the use of plastics in product packaging, acknowledging that this is not the most eco-friendly practice. From an optics standpoint, it doesn't look good that we're growing a green product, and yet we're using a package that is sort of, not in the same philosophy of doing us right in terms of the environment and sustainability. One producer noted that plastic bags are cheaper than rigid shells. And although not a solution, it's important to use recycled PET plastics and/or plastic product that is at the very least not single use and can be recycled. One producer noted that they're using Ziploc bags as a compromise with the hope that customers are reusing those bags more than once. And at least two producers noted that they have tried using bio bags that are intended to break down, but discovered that they weren't as compostable as they had hoped. The compost was much slower than they anticipated, and/or there was an incomplete breakdown of the product. Several producers brought up this issue that retailers that they're selling to are specifically interested in the rigid plastic packaging, these 5-ounce and 10-ounce containers, which are easy to handle and display in the chilled slider container shelves. And it was noted that retailers are reluctant to try other things, as rigid packaging combined with these slider shelves maximizes shelf space. And this pretty much has become the industry standard. And it's also the standard for what's being imported in the country as well. One producer noted that they experimented with using soft plastic bags in one store. And although the customers provided positive feedback, it still remained difficult to change the mindset of the retailer to go forward with the conversion and continue to make allowances for soft bags. One producer did confirm that they are transitioning to 100% recycled plastic packaging with a product that was custom designed for them. In terms of the alternatives to plastic, paper bags aren't really seen as a great option, in that they don't protect the leafy greens from dehydrating, and wilting the way that plastic options do right now. So this issue of extended shelf life. And paper also restricts the ability of customers to view the quality of the product, right? It's the importance of customers being able to visualize the freshness of the product they're buying. The sense of sort of eating with our eyes and knowing that the product that is in there is sort of something they can visually see and it meets their standard. So what to do, right? It's difficult to determine which type of bag is truly the most sustainable. And regardless of whether the bag is plastic, paper, or another material, in part, the most sustainable choice is using the bag you already have and trying to reduce its impact on the environment. And overall, trying to make an effort to reuse any bag that comes into your possession and disposing of the bag in a responsible way. Bio-based, I want to talk a bit about bio-based mulch films. They've been viewed by some stakeholders as a progressive substitute for the pure plastic mulches and ground covers. But the issue with these products is that they're not 100% bio-based and contain some polymers. So there are still some petroleum or natural gas or dyes or minerals or even some heavy elements in some cases, or metals that are still in those sort of bio-based products. And for this reason, they are no longer considered an allowable input that certified growers can use in Canada, or at least that's my understanding. As of 2015, I think they're no longer considered an allowable product. They were attractive though. Bio-based mulches were attractive because they generally provided the same benefit as a plastic mulch in that they helped moderate soil temperature, help suppress weeds, and they help conserve water. They were also viewed as more labor saving compared to other approaches to weed control, such as physical weeding and cultivation, mulching with hay or straw, because there was issues, for example, with the availability and the cost of organic hay or straw to use in that mulching process and the labor needed to apply it. And even alternatives such as landscape fabric or geotextiles. In their case, there are sometimes concerns about plant diseases remaining in that fabric since it's reused every year, and it's difficult and can be difficult to sanitize. So with respect to strategies, we would encourage and support efforts to raise awareness about the importance of reusing and recycling plastics at a minimum, but then also encourage to support the development, continue research into looking at these bio-based materials and what we can do to sort of get them closer to or absolutely at that 100% bio-based content for biodegradable. Finally, I want to touch on a risk threat opportunity related to all of this sort of alternative branding in the marketplace right now. There's a proliferation of this alternative branding that closely aligns with organic, but is not organic, right? So catchphrases like natural and sustainable and non-GMO, but again, not a necessarily organic product. And there's a sense that this organic alternative branding is devaluing the organic brand. Concern that this could result in market erosion for organic products going forward. Producers are concerned about this and feel that there really needs to be more full and truthful branding on food products to enable consumers to make informed choices. This was also a big issue that came up in the national survey about the threat of the unregulated marketing claims as a challenge threat to the expansion of the organic sector. Also, but in this context as well, several stakeholders emphasized that when it comes to salad greens, this particular product, the consumer can be very demanding and the quality must be consistently high, especially when paying a premium price. Producers talked about the challenge of delivering a consistent standard when producing in an outdoor environment. And it's one of the reasons why some producers purposely avoid selling into the wholesale market, which could be seen to be especially demanding in terms of product standards, packaging, and labeling. One producer observed that the attitude of restaurant chefs in relation to organic products has progressively improved as producers have improved delivering on quality, but consistency in quality can still be an issue with some chefs, and some chefs will put quality ahead of organic if there's a marked difference in the organic and non-organic product. Again, in talking with our producers as part of the salad greens piece, some of these sort of alternative branding labels that were coming to the surface were things like nutritious or naturally raised and non-GMO or sustainable production, or even some saying we only spray when we have to, being part of the product labeling. So while stakeholders observe that the consumer interest in organic has increased greatly, and COVID has stimulated greater interest in local foods, there's still this concern that the organic sector might be losing traction with all of this alternative branding and packaging that's out there. Some producers suggested that additional aspects of the organic philosophy need to be championed and promoted and expanded on to maintain brand advantage. For example, promoting the social responsibility aspects. And one producer really emphasized the importance of the organic industry going beyond promoting organic as a good choice and firmly positioning organic as the better choice, right? With respect to a strategy going forward, we think it's important to ensure that the marketing promotion of certified organic product enables consumers to easily differentiate the organic product from the non-organic options, right? Maybe tying in also this messaging around the resilience of organic farms and their ability to help mitigate climate change. Producers also see a role for retailers taking on a greater role in promoting organic products and informing consumers about the benefits of organic farming. And there was also some commentary on the importance of producers looking at creative ways to help retailers break out of their customary selling and pricing approaches to help consumers opt into the organic options. For example, maybe allowing consumers to pay a premium price if they want to support organic products. And maybe that would be the jump off or the lead-in point where they at least have an option at first, and then it can become a normalized practice going forward for them. We also want to emphasize that there's an important role for relevant provincial and federal government agencies to monitor and regulate eco-friendly marketing claims to ensure that they are truthful and not misleading. And so with that, that sort of ends the sort of formal part of our presentation. We'd be happy to sort of have to take questions and look at answers. I know we're almost coming up on quarter after the hour, but thank you to those that have stayed around, and we're happy to stay on for a while.
That's great. Thank you, Don, for your presentation. There is one. It's more of a comment and a suggestion that's come up in the question and answer. So I'll just read it out to you and get your response to it. So the comment is, stop encouraging offshore labor. Could government give subsidies to encourage local labor? This will put dignity back into work and give experience to general population for important life skills. And then also a subsidy to wage is more cost effective than offshore and having to have bunkhouses or accommodation and other things in place. So just over to you for a bit of reflection and comment.
Yeah, I'll comment on the wage sort of subsidy piece. So there are, and there have been the summer sort of employment programs that the federal government has been involved in, where they will top up a wage for summer, whether it's the summer students or summer employment. And that was commented on to some extent we did hear some feedback on that from some producers, and they have used it or experimented with it in the past. But I would say it comes back again to a reliability issue. It's not, even with that subsidy in place, is it sufficient to attract people to come out to the farm and be involved in manual labor, to be involved perhaps in long working days, to be involved in intense weeks of harvest, when this is when the harvest has to come off. There's no getting around it. You got to make hay when the sun shines. And again, sort of as one producer said, you have to sort of fish around to find, out of a group of 10 people, the 2 or 3 that are going to have some minimum qualifications to sort of you think are going to be suitable for that position, because then you're going to go forward and do the training, the investment on training and supervision. And it has just become, I think, difficult for producers to continue to sort of have to rely on that approach when they know the reliability issues and the the competency issues sort of can be dealt with when using the offshore labor. But I agree. I mean, I wish there was something, I think we do need to sort of somehow look closer at what we can to sort of making this a more accessible opportunity for people in Canada to get out there and work on farms. Because again, it's a potential entry point where they might have some sort of a passion about organic and see it from a distance as being something where I'd love to be involved in that in a bigger capacity. And until they go out into the field and sort of roll their sleeves up and start doing it, that's maybe the thing that sort of, I don't know what it's going to take to, whatever it takes to make it happen. I want to do this for a career and an occupation. So I think we still need to sort of look at it. I'm not saying we're done. I don't think we should give over entirely to sort of reliance on the offshore labor program. And I think there is a need that we need to, part of the recruitment for the next generation of farmers has to come from doing what we can to encourage and allow and promote these opportunities for access and entry and summer programs.
And so maybe just a quick follow-up to get your thoughts on, could a permanent residency for temporary foreign workers help to encourage better access to labor on organic farms?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have I don't know for sure. Marla, I don't have a thought on that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But it might be, kind of.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, we could have a look at that and sort of see what else is
yeah.
out there. But off the top of my head, I don't have a comment on that.
No, that's fair. And then another question: does are amaranth leaves considered a salad green? It's more of
I haven't seen it, but there could be. I wouldn't I'm not the most qualified person in the room to say whether it is or is not.
Yeah, maybe there's other producers online who might have farmers online who might have an answer to that one. And then maybe our last question or comment. Do you think the government could persuade the food terminal to take local organic produce? This place is fortified. The players inside to deal with US first. I have an easier time around the terminal instead of in. That seems like a very specific regional question, but I'll throw it over to you.
If it was to be the government sort of leveraging influence in that area, it would be through things like some sort of an incentive, right? They're incentivizing the food terminal to give organic an opportunity to have a space in that distribution system. So some sort of an incentivized, whether it's sort of a discount here or some other sort of incentive. I don't see why it couldn't be sort of looked at. The extent that it would be effective in terms of, would the food terminal be willing to accommodate? What other accommodations would the food terminal feel it would have to make to accommodate that organic product there in terms of ensuring that, again, the organic is looked after, right? That it is treated within the same regard or a higher regard than the conventional product that's on the floor, and that the product, when a buyer is going around is doing their purchases, that the organic product is given the attention, so that it is like in a store, like that people are going through and refreshing the store shelves, right? So that the organic product is looked after once it reaches that destination at the food terminal, and the buyer is looking at a product that is at its top form. So something around incentives potentially that a provincial or federal government might be involved in to try and to use as leverage to encourage the food terminal to sort of to make options available.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we're just coming up to sort of 20 minutes past the hour. So I think we'll wrap up now. And so with that, thank you, Dawn, and for everybody who's attended today. The webinar is an important milestone for the project, and the Canadian Organic Growers would like to thank Harry Cummings and Associates, Canadian Organic Trade Association, Sask Organics, as well as the many producers and stakeholders for their important contributions. We also want to acknowledge our appreciation for financial support provided by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Join us for similar webinars coming up for organic oats and field peas in the coming weeks. And if you've enjoyed today's webinar, please consider sharing information about our webinar series with your networks. So we're just going to throw up a quick poll here, I think, and just to ask you if you'd like to receive an invitation for future or upcoming webinars. And finally, as you're answering that poll, you can also watch the recordings of past webinars on organic carrots, beef, and blueberry supply chains on COG's YouTube channel. There's also a link being posted for that in the chat. So thank you again for being here today, and have a great rest of your day.